In 1939, German factory owners held pieces of paper that looked like money and acted like money, right up until the day they didn't. They had been paid for tanks, aircraft parts, steel, and ammunition, with promises signed by a company that barely existed. If you tried to cash those promises in, the only place that could truly honor them was the German state itself. And the state was running out of room. Not room in the budget, room in reality. The world saw parades, new highways, falling unemployment, and a nation that looked like it had found its footing again. Inside the machine, the bill was coming due, and it was due on a schedule. A neat, bureaucratic schedule. The kind that doesn't care about speeches or flags. So here's the question we have to answer if we want to understand how a modern country can sprint into catastrophe. How did Germany rebuild an army it supposedly couldn't afford, while hiding the cost so well that even parts of its own government couldn't admit what it had done? Go back to 1933 and forget for a moment the war we know is coming. Germany is a traumatized country with a shattered political center, millions unemployed, and a deep national humiliation that extremists are happy to monetize. The economy is scarred by the Great Depression and by the memory of hyperinflation from a decade earlier, when a lifetime of savings could evaporate between breakfast and dinner. Germans don't just dislike inflation, they fear it like a fire. When the Nazis take power, they inherit a state that is cash poor, credit constrained, and politically addicted to quick results. They promise jobs, rearmament, pride, and speed. And for a while, they deliver the part that looks like prosperity. Public works expand, rearmament ramps, factories reopen, unemployment falls sharply. But prosperity can be real and still be financed in a way that is dangerous. If you put a family back to work by giving them a credit card with no limit, you will see a happier household for a while. Meals return to the table. Shoes get replaced. The lights stay on. The only problem is the bill doesn't vanish. It waits and it compounds. Germany's problem was that the normal ways to finance a rearmament boom were politically and diplomatically radioactive. Borrow openly and you risk foreign alarm, higher interest costs and scrutiny. Raise taxes and you risk public backlash and slower growth. Print money and you risk waking the monster of inflation. On top of that, the post-World War I settlement and the international financial system made it hard for Germany to borrow abroad on attractive terms. The state needed a method that looked like normal commerce while functioning like hidden government debt. This is where Hjalmar Schacht comes in. Schacht was the kind of financial mind authoritarians love. Brilliant, pragmatic, and willing to build complicated machinery for simple, ruthless goals. He wasn't a cartoon villain twirling a mustache over a ledger. He was a central banker who understood something basic about power. If you can control payment, you can control production. And if you can control production, you can change the map. The instrument he helped create was called the Mefo bill. That name sounds like a ministry department, but it came from a shell company. Metallurgische Forschungsgesellschaft. Metal Research Company, shortened to Mefo. It was basically a legal mask. Mefo didn't have real operations on the scale implied by the bills it issued. Its function was to stand between the German government and German industry, so the government could spend without looking like it was spending. Here's how it worked in plain terms. Imagine the government wants 1,000 trucks, but doesn't want to write a check that shows up in the budget. So it tells the truck maker, we'll pay you with this special IOU instead. The truck maker accepts because the IOU is guaranteed by the government and, crucially, because it can be turned into cash at a bank. That bank will accept it because it can, in turn, take the IOU to the central bank, the sort of Reichsbank, and get real money for it. Everyone pretends it's a normal commercial transaction, just trade paper moving through the economy, when in reality it's the state borrowing through a side door. That side door mattered. Mefo bills did not initially sit in plain sight as government debt in the regular budget the way bonds would. They were designed to keep rearmament spending off the most obvious balance sheets, to delay political pain and to buy time. And it worked. Armaments firms like Krupp and Siemens could keep their lines running. Workers got paid. Suppliers got orders. The economy surged. Germany rearmed at speed. But the hidden mechanism had a hard limit built into it. Maturity. These bills were short-term at first, often 6 months, then renewed again and again, up to a maximum that effectively capped how long you could keep the debt floating before it demanded settlement. In practice, by the late 1930s, a 5-year horizon hung over the system. The bills could be extended. Yes, but only so far before credibility snapped or the central bank's balance sheet became a confession. This is where the pungent Ponzi scheme comparison becomes tempting, and also where we need to be precise. A classic Ponzi scheme is fraud. It pays old investors with new investors money while lying about where returns come from. Mefo wasn't a con in that sense. The firms knew they were holding state-backed paper. The banks knew the Reichsbank stood behind it. The trick wasn't deceiving the participants, it was deceiving the constraints. It was a structure built to postpone the moment the public, the bureaucracy, and foreign observers would be forced to acknowledge the true scale of German rearmament finance. And postponing is a seductive strategy. It feels like winning. It turns impossible problems into problems for your future self. The longer it works, the smarter it looks, the more dangerous it becomes to stop. Because once you've built your recovery on an engine that requires constant fueling, you can't just turn it off without consequences. If you slow rearmament spending, factories lose contracts, employment falls. The political story fractures. If you try to replace Mefo bills with normal government bonds, you have to admit what you did, and you might have to pay higher interest or face inflation fears. If you print money to redeem the bills directly, you risk unleashing inflation, the one economic trauma the regime cannot afford to trigger at home. So the Reich keeps rolling the paper. It's easier, it's quieter, it's tomorrow's problem. By 1938, the volume of Mefo bills outstanding had become enormous, on the order of many billions of Reichsmarks, a significant share of the state's hidden obligations. The Reichsbank was effectively underwriting rearmament. The central bank, supposed to protect the currency, was being drafted into an undeclared mobilization. And then the geopolitics tightened the noose. Rearmament isn't just about guns, it's about earned imports. You need oil, rubber, high-grade ores, and machine tools. Germany doesn't have enough of several key inputs. That means foreign exchange, which means exports or reserves, which means hard constraints. The more the regime spends inside the country, the more it needs from outside the country. And the more it runs into a wall made of dollars, pounds, and gold. This is the part that's easy to miss if you only watch the rallies and the uniforms. A modern economy is not self-contained. It breathes through trade. And if you're preparing for war, your lungs become a strategic target. Schacht understood this. He helped build the machine, and he also saw its limits. By the late 1930s, he was warning that the pace of spending was unsustainable, that inflation was being held down only by controls and repression, and that the financial architecture was becoming brittle. His relationship with the regime frayed, not because the regime suddenly became more extreme, because the math was getting loud. Now we come to the decision point, the fatal mistake. The thing that turns a dangerous workaround into a trap. Treating a temporary financing hack as a permanent way of life. Mefo bills were a bridge. The regime drove onto that bridge and then kept driving as if the bridge would lengthen forever. But a bridge doesn't lengthen, it ends. And when it ends, you either stop, turn back, or crash forward into whatever comes next. As the earliest waves of bills approached the end of their renewable life, the pressure rose. Holders wanted cash. Banks wanted clarity. The Reichsbank faced a choice: redeem on scale, which expands the money supply and threatens inflation, or refuse, which risks a financial seizure and a collapse in industrial confidence. Either path exposed the truth. Germany. Its apparent recovery was entangled with hidden state credit on a timer. And in that moment, the geopolitical aggression starts to look like something more than ideology. Not a replacement for ideology. Hitler's expansionism was real, and his racial imperial project was not invented by accountants, but a new accelerant, a way to make the balance sheet problem go away by changing what Germany controlled. Austria is annexed in 1938. Czechoslovakia is dismembered in 1938 and 1939. With each expansion comes access, factories, inventories, and, critically, foreign exchange reserves and gold that can be seized, redirected, or coerced into German hands. That isn't the sole reason these invasions happen, but it is part of how the regime keeps the engine running without admitting the engine is eating its own future. You can think of it like a household that can pay its credit card bill and decides the solution is to break into the neighbor's safe. That doesn't fix the spending habit. It just buys time and teaches the household a horrifying lesson. Theft feels like liquidity. By 1939, the system is cornered. The hidden debt is heavy. The need for imported resources is acute. The regime has built an economy that is full employment on paper, but fragile underneath, because it is full employment powered by state IOUs that must eventually be honored. And honoring them honestly would mean either austerity, inflation, or political retreat. None of those are acceptable to a dictatorship that has promised destiny. So the regime chooses the option that dictatorships often choose when the numbers done bend. It tries to bend the world. When Germany invades Poland in September 1939, the war that follows is not launched as a technical solution to Mefo maturities. It is launched because Nazi ideology demands conquest and annihilation, because strategic planners want depth and resources, because diplomacy fails, because the leadership believes it can win quickly. But the financial architecture matters because it narrows the set of options. It makes speed feel necessary. It makes robbery look like policy. Once the war begins, the financing logic becomes even darker and more explicit. Conquered economies are forced into arrangements that funnel resources back to Germany. Occupied central banks are looted. Clearing systems are manipulated. Payments become coercion dressed up as bookkeeping. Inflation at home is suppressed with rationing, price controls, and intimidation, while the costs are pushed outward onto others. The bills are paid, just not by the people who authorized them. And that is the real legacy of Mefo bills as a mechanism of power. They show how financial engineering can be used to mobilize a society without asking it for consent. Taxes are a conversation with your citizens. Borrowing openly is a conversation with markets. Printing money is a conversation with reality. Shadow financing is what you do when you don't want any conversations at all. The aftermath is measured in ruins, not spreadsheets. Germany's war economy becomes a machine that consumes Europe and then consumes itself. By 1945, the state that tried to outrun its liabilities is physically shattered. The currency is broken. The industrial base is bombed and dislocated. The moral catastrophe is beyond accounting. The regime that believed it could rewrite the constraints of economics discovers the oldest constraint of all. Violence creates enemies faster than it creates wealth. And the modern echo is uncomfortable because the mechanism didn't die with the Reich. We still build side doors. We call them special purpose vehicles, off-balance sheet obligations, quasi-fiscal programs, guaranteed loans that aren't really debt. Shadow banking that creates credit outside the most visible regulatory perimeter. The details differ, and democracies are not Nazi dictatorships, but the temptation rhymes. If you can hide the cost today, you can claim the benefit today. And if you claim the benefit today, you might still be in power when the bill arrives. The lesson isn't that every complex financial instrument leads to war. The lesson is that when leaders build legitimacy on an engineered boom, they become terrified of the moment the engineering is exposed. They start making decisions not to improve the future, but to delay the reckoning. And delaying the reckoning is how you end up doing things you once would have called unthinkable. Mefo bills were paper, ink, signatures, a clever structure. But they were also a promise that could only be kept by finding new sources of value fast enough to outrun the promise itself. When that's your governing logic, you stop treating peace as the default. Peace becomes a budget constraint. The most dangerous lie an economy can tell is not, we are rich. It's, we can pay later without consequences. Later always comes. Sometimes it arrives as inflation, sometimes it arrives as austerity, and sometimes, when the people in charge have built their entire identity on never admitting weakness, later arrives as a crisis they manufacture on purpose, because a controlled catastrophe feels safer than an honest apology. A country can survive bad years. It can even survive bad leaders for a time. What it struggles to survive is a leadership that turns finance into a weapon against truth. Because once you make denial profitable, you make reality your enemy. And reality doesn't negotiate. History doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme. If you want to hear the next rhyme forming in the systems we live inside right now, you know what to do.